Hi there and welcome to another episode of the 33 Fuel vlog. My name is Warren, I'm one of the co-founders at 33 Fuel and I will be your host today for this conversation with Taylor Thomas at Thomas Endurance Coaching, where we're going to be looking at how you can win the winter war. We are not talking about anything quite as dramatic as going and taking on the Eastern Front in Russia, perhaps, let's say, during the Second World War. No, it's not that kind of winter war. The kind we're looking at here is the kind of a training war, okay? The Battle of Winter, where really it's dark, it's cold, it's miserable, it's sort of the off-season anyway, so maybe you should spend a bit more time on the sofa, and that's certainly a part of it. But the point is, work in winter is where you make your best ever summer season. You can't have a summer season spring out of the bag in April. It needs some work behind it. And Taylor is he's an expert on this kind of thing. In fact, he's even said that he might prefer to train athletes between October and March than to be there in the glory season at the end of it all, because that is really the engine room of your season. So if you're looking for a little bit of fire for your winter training, something to put a pep in your step, then this is absolutely where you need to be. Because frankly, at 33 Fuel, this is our mission, sharing the best possible tools so that athletes can be the best they can be. And we do that by sharing great conversations with great coaches, athletes, and leading thinkers like Taylor. And we also do it in store at 33fuel.com, where we make the best, finest, most delicious, natural, high-performance sports nutrition. So do go and get some of that and get tucked in, but not before you've enjoyed this conversation with Taylor Thomas. Taylor, thanks so much for coming to join us this morning. Well, it's afternoon for me. It's morning for you. I see you've got your coffee on there. You said already up since 6, got a bit of training in, and you're ready to go now.
That's it. Yeah, just try to start the day on a high note, and I think even you and I have talked about this, where you wake up with a lot on your mind, and it's best for me just to kind of dive in and get right to it. So no, this is good. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, no, real pleasure. And I think maybe you run a similar commuting schedule to us here at 33 Fuel, where you're wherever you may be sleeping at the time and your office are not really very far apart.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I've toyed around in the past with having offsite offices and going to an office and having space, and it just didn't. I'm not someone who needs that. I'm very productive in a home office. I know a lot of people have had, I talked to a lot of folks that have issues making that separation, and it becomes problematic. You get distracted, and I don't have any of those issues. I really just, it seems fine. And the team that I work with at TEC, where everyone's remote, so we have the coaches and then folks like you, our partners, and they're all over the world. So we don't do a lot of in-face or in-person, face-to-face meetings or whatever. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense either. So yeah, no, it's my bed and my office are mere steps apart, which makes the transition easy. It makes it challenging some days to remember to get out of your pajamas, So I have to make a concerted effort to put on real clothes, But that's
I know what you mean with that one. I mean, long before we started 33 Fuel, my former career was as a journalist. I was freelance for like 10 years. And I don't know, journalism and writing in your pajamas, not much of a problem. Freelance journalism, working from home, not a problem. Didn't affect productivity. But I find sometimes when things are on the real businessy end of the scale now, I mean, meetings, that's a different thing, but, working from home or wherever we may happen to be on our travels, I find, I don't know, it's a little subconscious thing. If I'm doing something particularly businessy, I can't do it in my pajamas. If I'm doing something creative, I can. Like spreadsheets and pajamas feel wrong. Writing something in pajamas feels all right.
You're really right. I feel the same way. I hadn't really thought about it, I guess. But yeah, I think subconsciously, I when I have like a meeting or a conference call or something like you and I are doing. Not that I would have shown up to this in my pajamas, but but yeah, no, it feels like you need to get dressed for it. It feels like something that you should at least put some effort into to kind of present your best self. Not that I'm wearing a suit and tie, but my version of my best self. And yeah, when I'm doing creative work, yeah, writing, I'll do a lot of that. Early mornings, later at night when I'm kind of just thinking about. I don't know. To me, there's certain kind of an ebb and flow to the day where some moments, time periods seem to be more conducive to certain types of work. I don't know if you ever like. I don't know. Mid morning when I've like had a couple cups of coffee and I'm feeling it. That's like business time. That's strategy. That's biz dev. That's the kind of high level thought. And then on the kind of either sides of that, it can be more kind of like creative notes, brainstorming, you know, put things in my notebook and so on. So yeah, it's a constant, it's an ever changing landscape and journey. I'm just along for the ride. We'll see what happens.
I think one of the nice things I like about the sort of the schedule of not commuting, as in whether you're working from home or if you're traveling and working from wherever you may be, is it buys you time. I find that my kind of base sort of tick over warm up training, it's just a little bit of yoga and strength and conditioning, 5-10 minutes of meditation, probably takes about 40-45 minutes, but that's probably less than the average commute in the UK. And
Right.
I get to do that instead of sitting in traffic or sitting on public transport. And that discipline seems to work really well. And I think that can be the case for a lot of people if they work from home. Do you find it fits in the same way for you?
I do. Yeah, I think it's easier to have a much more, in my opinion, um, I mean, a much more, I guess, kind of like regimented day where, because there are no disruptions. You're not at the whim of a traffic or, breakdown of a public transport or, there's all these variables when you leave your, home environment or an environment you're comfortable with or have control over to go outside and do, and then everything can happen, right? You don't know what's gonna how the traffic's gonna be or how long it's going to take you to get to work. And yeah, so I mean, for me, that's a really big piece of it, and why I kind of stopped fighting it, really. Whereas trying to create this office space and create this like traditional kind of ebb and flow of the day or structure throughout the day, I find it much more productive. Yeah, where you can just I wake up and the first thing I can do is be productive, basically, right? Now, what not necessarily, it doesn't have to be in regards to work. It can be productive in terms of self-care as well, right? Exercise, meditation. I read a lot in the mornings. That tends to be a time where I try to get in some sort of kind of, try to make myself a little smarter, some sort of continuing education or something. So yeah, no, I think I find, I mean, infinitely more productive, and the quality of my work is much better when I've taken away that or removed all of those variables on either side of the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, then that's great for me, because um, I get really, I guess just pure trans or in the name of transparency. I get very frustrated when I'm not when I'm not productive. I really like to feel like I'm moving the needle. When those types of things are not under my control, and you just get tossed around in traffic, and the day kind of goes sideways, and you don't have much control over that. It just feels frustrating. I think anybody would feel that way, but I can be a little maybe a little bit more frustrated by that than some people. I don't take it in stride as well as some people do.
Yeah, I feel when you've got a lot of stuff to do, it can be a harder thing to deal with those moments and to retain your either calm or acceptance or going with the flow, and rather than resisting it and turning it into a ball of angst, because there's a load of stuff to do and it's not done yet. But that's part of what we touched upon in conversation on your podcast, was about how you have to, when you have a real mission and a goal, it's very different to just turning up and doing a bit of work. You have a real connection to what you do. So when you do get a spanner thrown in the works through a traffic jam or whatever, that can make your day that much trickier. But to go to what we figured we'd really dive into here, and I think so much of what we've already talked about plays into it, because it's about, we were talking about, your take on winter training, but not just winter training, how do you survive it? Winter training as being the place where you really build your best season. That great race, that great string of results, or, those PBs, whatever happens in the summer, you kind of built it in the winter. It didn't start in April.
Right.
Can you tell me a bit more about that theme? Because I think from there we can then go into how do you build those days in the winter, and all that stuff we were talking about was really just a part of that as well.
No, I mean you nailed it for sure, and I really it's something that I talk a lot about, and because I think that there really needs to be, even though we have modern kind of performance metrics and all of these tools that we use to analyze our data and our performances and map out our training. From the athlete side, we're still very much wrapped up in this, what I would call an antiquated mindset of we're really not doing anything until we're building towards a race, meaning 12 weeks before race day, right? Or 16 weeks before race day, or in the spring, right? If you're in the Northern Hemisphere and you have a more or less traditional kind of periodization strategy, this time between, September and October to March really gets lost on a lot of people, and they're not sure what to do with it. They struggle to think that it's as important as this kind of race season, and I think that that's just wholly the wrong way to look at things. To your point, or like you said, I mean, you can't do the work in the spring if it's not built on a foundation that can support it, right? Meaning that any success that you have during the race season, quote unquote, is going to be built upon, or your kind of springboard for that success is the work that you've done in kind of the dark days of winter. And I've always said I'd rather work with an athlete in the winter than race season, right? Because I would feel more comfortable working with them from October to March, and then kind of sending them out, and then having them race. And then through racing, you can build race fitness, right? But then I at least would know for sure that they have the foundational strength and the mental strength, the emotional piece. We work on this kind of fully well-rounded athlete, or building this fully well-rounded athlete in the winter. And then, not that I wouldn't want to, of course, carry them through race season and be a part of that, but if I had to choose, I'd much rather work with them in the winter and make sure that we're checking all those boxes, so that then they can have a successful race season. So, yeah, that and that this time of year looks different for different people. I think it tends to be more nuanced than a traditional race season. Like, if you were training for, you and I had talked about training for like a 70.3, a half Ironman. If you have a group of athletes training for 70.3 within a similar level of fitness, during the race season, that training is going to look relatively similar. Right now, of course, it's based on the amount of time you have and in your outside responsibilities and stressors. But generally, there's going to be key brick run sessions. You're going to have a swim. You're going to have a bike run, and you're going to do a tempo run. And so there's these kind of generally agreed upon components that will be there for everyone. That's not the case in the wintertime, right? That can be wildly, what do we work on? What did we learn from past seasons? Where do we need to focus our time? Again, one of the things that I really try to dive into now is how do we set an athlete up mentally and emotionally to tackle the rigors of race season, right? There's a lot of emotion that goes into that. And if you haven't done the work internally as an athlete to kind of grapple with a lot of those emotions that happen, the highs and lows, you can't really build those tools fast enough during the race season in real time, right? It's the introspection and the work that we do now. I say now because it's winter, but during the winter season, that's what really gives you the tools to carry, to have a strong race season, to be able to manage those nuances and the dynamics of racing, because it's not all good, right? There's bad training sessions, there's bad races. So yeah, it's so important to me to think more critically about this time of year, and it doesn't mean that you don't have some space. It doesn't mean that you train at the same intensity or the same volume that you do during race season. I'm not advocating for a continued, 365-day training plan, but that the way that the winter season and early spring is structured is just as valuable, if not more so, than your traditional race season. And it's not as sexy as race season, right? People don't think about it in the same way, because it doesn't have the same vibe, or doesn't have the same kind of panache, but it's so important, and again, arguably maybe more important than that kind of that 8-week build up to race period, when you're doing all your intensity and all your volume, and that feels really like something you want to talk about, but that's all built on what you did in December, when you're doing your sessions on the trainer and you're really focused and your individualized work. And so yeah, no, I think if I have a soapbox, I think that might be it.
Well, I really like the idea in there that you'd almost rather work with the athletes October to March, and it makes the point really forcefully that October March period, if you're looking to step up your game, whether that's taking fractions of seconds off, whether it's taking hours off, whether it's stepping up from marathons to ultra marathon, or you want to go back to do a half marathon at a really crazy pace, or changing sport, whatever it may be, that October March period is really where that begins. It doesn't start in January. It doesn't start in April. It starts in, as you put it, in those dark days. And I mean, you talk about the rounded athlete, and I really like that part as well, because it's sport is not just physical. It's mental and it's emotional, and it has to fit into the rest of your life, which is both mental. It's mental, emotional, and physical. They're all going on together at once. It's how you play around with those ratios. But for you to build, if you were looking to build a rounded athlete over winter, what would you say would be the sort of 3 or 4 core building blocks that you'd be looking to put in place for a solid winter training plan to really springboard that summer success?
Yeah, I mean, I want to touch on a little bit, but before I kind of outline that, I think you had talked about kind of, you mentioned just kind of the goals of an athlete, whether you're taking seconds off or looking to do, long distance rides or whatever. But I think what I've seen, and I think maybe a misconception, is that the people that have the most to gain, meaning the people that are, more age group athletes, beginning athletes, athletes that don't have a tremendous background in sport or a tremendous capacity built up, they often are the ones that don't treat this time period. Right? There's a relationship there that I see, where those athletes treat this time period that we're talking about with kind of the least amount of respect, and they have the most to gain by doing the work now. Right, your top tier athletes, one, they're of course going to continue to do the work, but they're also talking about seconds or 1 to 2% gains here and there to tweak an already very fine-tuned machine. That work happens, that a lot of that work can happen during that race specificity, right, where you're doing your really hard sessions and you're making sure to kind of tweak things. It's all of us, right? Everybody else who has a lot to gain, right? We're not operating, and I'm of course putting myself in this group as well. We're not operating at the top levels, and so this work now is what when we stand to make the biggest gains, right? That foundational strength. But to your question, it's always the place that I start from is always individualization, right? So before anything happens, before we talk about what the runway looks like, how long a particular phase will last for a training block in terms of just kind of general periodization. We have to talk about the athlete, right? What are their strengths and weaknesses? What are their goals? And then we kind of take that and back ourselves into what the training needs to look like. How much time do they have? What are their family obligations, commitments? The other thing we have to consider during the winter months is there's a lot of holidays, right? So you have New Year and you have Christmas and you have Thanksgiving here in the States, and that can be disruptive, right? And disruptive in a good way, meaning that there should be time for family and friends, and we want to work all that. And so we kind of take all these pieces and we figure out what that needs to look like for a specific athlete. So individualization is key. And I say that because a lot of people that I talk to and a lot of folks that we work with at TEC, they come to a coach with preconceptions of what the approach should be, right? That there needs to be 16 weeks of X, or 12 weeks of this, or 8 weeks. And that just, we have to figure that might not work for some people, right? And we need to have a fluidity and an individualization there to make sure that the training makes sense. So assuming that we have things kind of individualized, a big focus, again, assuming that all of us have could be stronger, could be more aerobically fit, that kind of core, kind of foundational strength. And what I mean by that is really you're building your capacity to do work, right? And so the intensity at which that happens is different for every athlete, but there's value in kind of coming back to center. And while VO2 max sprints and neuromuscular work and all of these kind of classic race prep interval sessions again are sexier, there's a lot of value in kind of sticking with what we know, right? And that's these long tempo sessions, long sweet spot work, just to build capacity, right? To build efficiency, muscular endurance, aerobic endurance, and capacity. That's what everything else is going to be built off of. And so I think spending time in some form or fashion, depending on what works for an athlete, doing that, focusing on that is a really good use of time. And that can be done through trainers, interval sessions on the trainer. It's not it's probably not your classic LSD, long slow distance ride. If we're talking about cycling, it's probably more focused, work below threshold, and fine tuning that to work on that efficiency to operate, or ability to operate efficiently at slightly higher intensities than that kind of classic zone 1, zone 2 work. Because that's probably not, most people probably don't have enough time to ride in zone 1, zone 2, or run in zone 1, zone 2, to build capacity, right? The way that works is you have to have 25 hours a week, right? So we probably need to increase the intensity a little bit, and then work on that efficiency. The other piece that I think I'm a big believer in is strength training. Now, I think this can look wildly different for different people. This is another place I work with athletes to figure out what works for them. It needs to be something that's kind of in their comfort zone, right? I think a lot of people just they're not as comfortable in a classic gym scenario. It doesn't feel comfortable. Right? There's a lot of different ways to get at this, and so I'm not someone who's going to say, okay, you got to go in the gym for 12 weeks, and we got to do 3 days a week of traditional strength training exercises, meaning like a squat rack, front squat, back squat, deadlift. So those can be very, very valuable. Those are great if they work for a particular athlete. So again, back to individualization. You also have to have access to those things, right? So maybe that's not maybe that doesn't work with the athlete. So there's a lot of different ways to get at that, but I think it's important. Again, there's a muscular component to endurance sports, obviously, and we need to work that. So integrating strength training, typically in the difference between the winter months and the kind of race season is that the strength training tends to take up more volume, right? So we do more of it. I like to integrate some level of strength work more or less year round. Now there's some times in race preparation phase where we pull that away and put in more volume for race specific training. But I like to have it more or less throughout the year, but we do more of it during the winter. And that's going to make tremendous impacts, again, in your capacity to do work. So muscular strength, if you can increase that you're stronger, right? And I'm also a big, I talk about, I'm not necessarily interested in, I shouldn't say I'm not interested in it, but I'm my focus is building an athlete and not an, insert someone's discipline, right? So I don't want you to be a runner or be a cyclist or be a skier or be a whatever. I want you to be an athlete first, and then we want to make sure that your fitness is specific to your discipline. But I also want you to be able to go out and, carry the groceries from your car to your house, or to, bend down and pick up your kid, or to, go for a run. If you're a cyclist, with the exception of, top tier level athletes that truly need that like 100% specificity, you should be able to go for a light run, right? And it shouldn't kill you. So I like that kind of athletic approach versus a 100% focus on your discipline. And I think the strength training piece goes a long way towards that goal, right? It makes you strong in ways outside of that your primary discipline can produce. So strength training is the other piece. And then one kind of, I guess, maybe a third thing would be, I think it's important to have a timeline. So to figure out what this time period looks like for an individual, it can feel a little bit like purgatory, right? So it can feel like you come out of race season and maybe you have a little downtime in the early part of the fall, or whatever your season is, or maybe you're racing cyclocross or something, and but there's some point where there's a transition, and then you kind of get into this winter period where you have all these things in your mind. You're like, okay, I need to work on my foundational strength. I need to increase my volume and strength training. I need to work on my aerobic capacity. But then, like, how long do I do that for? And then when do I flip the switch? So that's the other issue or thing that I see people run into is they hear people like me talk and they're like, okay, great, I'm committed. Winter months, that's it. But then they do it for too long, right? So you also can't not begin to shift towards race specificity and really fine tune those race requirements. You can't. That has to be done at a certain time, and that's, of course, has to be done in proximity to your priority races. It also needs to be done thinking about how you've performed best in the past. So some people, they might be able to do a nice long kind of, relatively moderate build or kind of base and build, and then they can kind of flip the switch, right? Maybe they only need 8 weeks and they're ready to go, right? And maybe that's all they can sustain, that race prep. Other people might need 16 weeks, right? They might need a more kind of gradual build in. I know that's how I am. Like, I need a long runway. It takes a while for my body to kind of adapt. And I've learned that by looking at past seasons, thinking critically about what worked and what didn't, and making adjustments. And so that's a big piece, is figuring out when that transition and that kind of switch needs to be flipped. So yeah, I think those would be like my top three. Again, there's a lot of nuance in there, but yeah, I mean, I think if you can have a plan, if you can review your, kind of figure out what worked, and be self-critical. I think that's a hard thing for people to do, right? Is to admit that maybe they didn't do as much as they could have, or do the right thing at the right time. So, if you're a self-coached athlete or you're working with a coach, think about that, and be okay with saying, okay, that didn't work. Obviously, I wasn't my best self on race day. That didn't work. Let's now figure out what we need to adjust. So yeah, I mean, get that runway in place, and then, come back to home base in terms of like building that capacity, your ability to be athletic, to feel strong. And, that really starts to set things in motion, and puts you in the right mindset. That's another thing we can talk about, but that mindset piece is key too. And there's a lot of practices, that folks can go through, or a lot of tools people can use. But yeah, those are my top three.
Well, I like those ones, and we'll come on to the mindset to build it in there in a moment. But there was something you said there. We sort of really reinforced the point that I really loved the way you explained. Athletes who have the most to gain in winter are often the least likely to be really making those gains in the winter, because if you are a casual or even a fairly serious amateur athlete, it can be pretty natural to see you've gone through the season. Your race, your big race is going to be back end of July, August, September time. You're coming into October. The weather's starting to close in a bit. November, December, January can very easily be a switch-off time, but I really like the way you said, if you are in that boat, then unless you have been at your absolute physical peak, you've been a world champion in your sport at some point, the amount of headroom to improve for all amateur athletes is huge, and that gain can be enormous in the winter, which can also play into, I think, maybe where professionals who are splitting seconds might get a kick, some of them, out of training on Christmas Day, because they know their opposition won't be training, or most won't. Do you think amateurs can get a kick from training through December, January, February, knowing that the majority of the people they're going to be racing against come summer probably weren't training then?
I do, and I think that for me, that really gets into the kind of mental. I think about that more as having, of course, there's a physical component there in terms of gain fitness, but I think that does a lot to kind of inject some kind of passion and spirit into the right athlete, right? Like I've talked a lot about kind of enjoying the process, right? And this really ties into what we're talking about, is that it's really easy to just like the race preparation, right? And you're just in a mad sprint to the race day, and you get to race day and you race, and then all of your hopes and dreams are kind of hanging on the build up and the race, right? And I just think that really sets people up for failure, because you have tough days. And so I always try to position it as enjoying the process, right? Find value in those days when you train, and get derive some passion and joy from knowing that your competitors aren't out there, right? Or that they didn't wake up at 4 a.m. and do their training, or they didn't stay up late, right? The times when it's not convenient are the times that I've always found fuel me the most, right? When I had, I didn't get great sleep, and I'm not saying, you don't want to burn the candle at both ends all the time. I mean, certainly balance is key, but those time periods or those days when you get up and that your competitors are, having a holiday dinner, or didn't, or had too many, cocktails the night before, right? I mean, I think that goes a long way in kind of fueling that mental piece to drive that passion, right? For the right athlete. But I think finding that in whatever capacity works for an individual is really important, because if your only drive is the, extrinsic motivator of race day, you have a short life in the sport, right? Because you have all year to do your sport, and you have a few days of racing, right? Or maybe, I mean, even if you have a chock full race calendar, it's only a few days, right? And you have all these other days. So loving, finding that process, or finding joy in that process, figuring out what that process looks like for an individual is really key. And that's when I think in these winter days, that's when you really discover your process, right? It's when it's sunny outside and there's your friends are, asking you to join them for a workout. I mean, those are all easy days to show up, right? And that feels great. And we love those days, and we look forward to those days, but they're few and far between, right? The work that moves the needle often is done in your basement, right? Or wherever it happens. And you have to, I'm a big advocate of, you have to like that session really as much as you like going out with your friends. And, there can't be a stark difference, because a lot of that time, is spent with just you in your own head, right? So that process, you have to find that joy. And so the winter time is a great time to figure out that process, right? What do I enjoy? What is it about the sport that drives me? And, I like to work with athletes. We talk about, finding your why a lot, right? Like why you're doing it. And if the answer is race day, we have to start again, right? Like, okay, nope, that's not the right answer. Go back, right? It can be part of the answer. I mean, great. Like, absolutely. Let's get a podium. Let's win. I'm hyper competitive. I get it as much as the next person, but it's not going to happen all the time, right? That can't be your only motivator, right? You have to find the other things that drive you to get to that podium, and then that podium finish, or that race finish is the external feedback to then that you then fold back into that kind of that why, right? Those intrinsic motivators. So that's I think that's really important. And back to these athletes that have the most to gain, being, all of us, with the exception of the top few percent, we're often the ones that haven't taken the time to figure that out, right? So we have the most to gain, and we're putting the least in, right? Whereas the athletes at the top, they got it, they're doing it, right? There's a reason that they're up there. So, I think that's something that mental piece, sorting through the kind of the now's the time to do it, now being the winter, and I think that's when you can really find value and find your passion in the sport, because there's no one else looking, right? Whatever it is that gets you excited when it's dark outside, like that's the thing that drives you, right? It's not, when you're going down the finish row at, Ironman Kona, in the high fives, like, of course you're excited then, right? But what was it that got you excited, 8 months before that, when you were doing training sessions and, in your garage or whatever?
Yeah. What was driving you at 5 a.m. in the rain on a Wednesday morning when no one was watching apart from one person who can't sleep walking their dog?
Right. And that's for me, that's my favorite thing, personally, about endurance sports, is I honestly could care less about race day. I love doing it, and like you said, like, I love doing it when I feel like no one else is doing it, and that's I don't even care if it makes me more fit. Like, I'm not operating at the top levels of my sport anymore. That's fine. I've adjusted my expectations, but that's still the value proposition for me, right? Is I like, if I have to get up at if I'm doing, if I'm training for ultra marathon and I have a busy work day and I still need to get in my long run, I love the idea of, like, getting up at 2 a.m. to do my long run, to be back at the office in time, and I'm almost have like a secret grin on my face all day, knowing that I had just done a 6-hour run in the mountains before I got to work. And I kind of have that, edge over people. Now, I might be exhausted, and it might be awful, but just having that piece, and again, that took me kind of stepping back and over the, and being very critical and kind of asking hard questions with myself. And, that's something that's really what's kept me in the sport my entire life, right? Because I'm not winning races anymore, right? Those days are probably behind me. I mean, other than if no one else shows up and I'm the only one that gets out of bed, like that's my only chance. Um, but I find just as much value in the process, as anything else. So yeah.
Well, I think another thought that occurred to me is that and you're absolutely right. That winter build, that winter phase, October, March. Now, depending on when people listen to this, it might be January, and it would be easy. It could be February, and you think, oh, that's a great idea. If but it's meant to start in October. It's already January or February. God, I guess I better got to wait for next year, which is not necessarily the point. It sort of brings me back to a quote, and I don't know where it is, or maybe it's an old Japanese proverb or something, but it is the best time to plant a tree is 30,000 years ago, and the second best time is today.
Right.
Do you think that does apply to winter? It's not about, if you were not ready for your winter build-up on the 1st of October, then you've really got to wait until the next year, or can you pick this up at any point, and still achieve a benefit during the winter months or whatever's left of winter?
Yeah, I think you can. And that's a great point. I think a lot of people feel like they get behind, right? Maybe life happens. Maybe the holidays get the best of them, and they're not as focused as they wanted to be. Maybe they went in with the best intentions, or maybe they just didn't know at all, or whatever. But they kind of catch wind of what we're talking about, and they're like, oh shit, I missed the boat. I might as well just sit around until April and see what I can do.
But pass me that extra piece of cake. I've got another 2 months before I do anything.
Right. Yeah. Might as well just go for broke now. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I mean, start, there's value in just in moving forward, and if nothing else, even if you can't dive into, or if you can't produce the fitness that you maybe feel like you need or want, because your first race is, maybe in March or something, right? Maybe, even if you don't feel like you have that runway, doing a lot of the things, kind of internally that we talked about. So, working through the kind of mental pieces, thinking about that runway. When do you make that transition? That's something that, January is great for. Take your priority race or your season opener or whatever, and think about what that's going to look like. How do you manage that transition from January to March, April, May? When does it happen? And what, as athletes, we don't have any control over that because we don't set the race calendar, right? So that's something that we really, that's what's going to be dramatically different for most folks, is that you're doing different events, right? You might be focused on the same discipline, but one event's in May and another athlete's got a race in April, and maybe a season opener road race, here in the States. A lot of your places in the South, the road season starts in early March. Well, if that's the case, right, then everything gets shifted. So like January really becomes November, right? And so it really has to do. So take this time and think about your proximity to your race calendar and what your goals are. And there's still a lot of value in just sorting that out and having just a macro level plan in place. You don't have to have every workout sorted out. You don't have to put in some, really detailed annual training plan if you don't want to. Again, just in your mind, like, when does that happen? Pull from past experiences, what worked, what didn't. There's value in that alone. If you use January for nothing else, or February or December. But then start training as well. I mean, getting strength training, again, I mean, that you can do a lot with 8 weeks, right? So if you were just been sitting around, you feel like you missed the boat, 2 to 3 times a week, for January, February would do massive things for most athletes, especially if you don't have if you haven't been doing it, or maybe you've taken some time off, or maybe you weren't doing it because you were doing more volume in your primary discipline during race season, and so now you have maybe 3, 4, 5 months where you realize you haven't really been doing much strength training, specifically loaded work. So with weights. So getting in, thinking about how that gets integrated, that's going to go a long way. And then bike and run. I mean, if you can get to a place where you feel like you have kind of a reach a benchmark of fitness before the race season starts, meaning that if you're running, if you're an ultra runner, I always think that like that hour and a half, 2 hour run is a really nice benchmark, right? If you can go out and you can run 20K and feel really comfortable, 20 to 25K, and I just you're going about your day, you can knock that out in the morning, it doesn't feel overly taxing. Like that kind of is a good indicator that you have that capacity, right? You can go up from there, you can integrate intensity. Again, these are not hard and fast rules, but it is I've found just with tons of data and tons of athletes over the years, like if you're in that ballpark where that just feels very comfortable to run for an hour and a half or 2 hours during the winter months, that's going to be really easy for you to build into those. Certainly, ultra distance stuff, or even marathon prep, or half. That's probably too much for half marathon, but and then on the bike side, 2 to 3 hours, right? If you can go out and you can ride at a moderate intensity, kind of that zone 3 for 2 or 3 hours and feel comfortable, not feel overly taxed. Feel like you have energy at the end as well as you did at the beginning. That's a good, again, benchmark for capacity. If you're so you can start to move towards some of these benchmarks where you can at least check some boxes and say, okay, I have a solid amount of fitness where I can build from. I can layer in intensity. I have some foundational strength. Then that it doesn't take a ton of time, right? So I mean, I think a lot of people get scared because they, to your point, like they feel like they don't have 20 weeks to do that. They're never going to move the needle, and it's nice. More time is always better because it can be more measured, and you can have some more space, and you can allow for sickness and for off days and travel and this. But yeah, I mean, if your first race is in April, you can put together a nice 8 to 12 week runway to build into those kind of benchmark rides and runs and integrate strength work, and really do a lot, as long as it's tailored to fit the individual. So yeah, start now.
Yeah, just start. Get into it. Yeah. Never too late. But to your point there about having those benchmark things in the bag, whether it's that run distance, the bike distance, it's going to be different for each sport and each athlete. But would this link into the mindset idea, in that when you have those base foundations in the bag, and let's just say, okay, marathon season's coming up, you're a marathon runner, and you can go and put in 20K easy on a Sunday, or after work, and it's going to be fine. That's going to be totally absorbable by you within your current framework. Does that play into the mindset, as in you've not just built a physical base, but you're building this sort of subconscious confidence base where you just know, you don't look at a marathon and go 26 miles at that point. You're kind of like, well, it's only kind of 10, 13 on top of what I'm comfortably knocking out now. So you've already made the sort of monster smaller. Is that a part of it for the mindset?
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. And I do think that there's a big mental piece to feeling like your goals for the season aren't insurmountable, right? If you're starting from zero, or relative, if a relatively low level of fitness because you've taken time off. Again, you're in December, January, you haven't really done what you needed to do for the last several months. You're feeling kind of down on yourself. you know that whether you've been training or not, it's fitness clearly isn't there. Um, that from 0 to 100 is a very long way to go, right? 100 being your goal. If you stay at 50, right, 50 to 100 is much more manageable, and you can compartmentalize the steps. You can compartmentalize mentally the steps to get to your goal much easier, because that distance is shorter. You know that you're not only are you trying to build your base and your foundation and then layer in race specificity and so on. You can kind of, again, we've talked about, springboard or benchmark, or that idea that if during race season your training is at 80 or 90%, and then race day is 100%, and you kind of oscillate between this pretty tight range. We're talking about the winter season, maybe you're at 50 or 60%, right? So you do let it back off, right? You can't operate at race capacity year round. So, but again, 50 is a hell of a lot better than 0 or 20 or 10, right? And I think that's where people, they really struggle to, they undersell themselves because of that exact point, right? If you're sitting January, and a lot of races open up in January, and and so you start to sign up for events, and you have to think about what you're going to do. And if you're in that space mentally, I see a lot of people not push the sign up button, right? They're like, it's too far. I can't, I can't. They can't mentally get themselves from where they're at to the end point, to the goal, and so they back off and they do the lesser distance, they do the lesser time, the lesser terrain, and I think, and then that might be fine. That might be what is going to make them happiest. Again, if it adds value, that's good. But if you're doing it from a place of fear, then that becomes a detriment, right? And I think that happens a lot, where athletes kind of shortchange the potential for experience that they can have by taking on a really aggressive goal, because they feel like they can't get there. Whereas, again, if you maintain and you feel like you've really done the work that makes you stronger and makes you more confident, right? It doesn't mean that in December and January you could go win a race. You don't have that type of fitness, but you have that fitness. I've described it as like, it's like confidence building fitness. You just feel good, right? You feel strong, you feel efficient. You know that you're moving the needle, even if some of these kind of primary metrics that we use to track fitness, even if they're not moving. If you're using, tools like Training Peaks, we look at chronic training load and acute training load, and those might not be doing much, but again, it's more of like it's a feeling, right? It's much more qualitative during this time of year, during the winter months, than it is quantitative, and again, the quantitative piece is the sexier piece, right? You see all the graphs move up, and you can see the movement, and you're doing races, and that's really easy to respond to. But yeah, I think the winter time is really much more kind of that. It's much more of the the internal kind of motivator, time period, right? And just feeling good. And then I've definitely seen it more, more than I'd like to, where an athlete will come, maybe come talk to one of our coaches in January, February, March, whatever. And we talk about the races that they maybe have in mind. And they're like, well, this year I'm just going to do the 100K, right? And not the 100-miler, or I'm just going to do, right? And they're downplaying their goals. And it's, the language they use is one to say that they don't feel confident in what they're doing, right? They're just kind of going through the motions because they didn't feel like they have the fitness. They don't feel like they have the time, the energy, whatever. And that's when it becomes problematic, right? Because I like to work with athletes or help athletes have that experience of drawing the best of themselves out, right? And I think that maintaining and treating the winter months with just as much respect as the race season really goes a long way in kind of changing that your attitude and how you think about the season as a whole, where you derive your value from. So yeah, that sounds very kind of, I guess, esoteric or philosophical, but there is so much wrapped up in for an athlete. There's so much of this is a part of an athlete's identity, and so you really have to think about it in these more kind of nuanced terms where, okay, great, like periodization is fantastic, but what's it going to do how's it going to drive you forward, from a motivation perspective, or, mentally, emotionally. And that's where, that maintaining fitness and feeling like you're doing something positive in the winter months can really go a long way. If you extrapolate that feeling out into June and July, that you could be a totally different person, right? I mean, that sounds like a stretch, or maybe I'm reaching, but I see it happen all the time with athletes, where like the person that you build in January is the person that exists in June, right? And that has to be essentially the June version of you has to be just an accelerated, more fit version of your person in January, right? They can't be complete opposites. You're never going to be able to make that switch. So yeah, that's my philosophical.
I like it. I like it. I like it a lot. And also that idea that it's qualitative, not just quantitative, whereas the race season can be a lot more based on the numbers and the stats and the time and the hours and the watts and whatever it may be. But in that winter season, I think it can also go into the simplest of things. Like when you're in a training groove, really simple stuff. You just know which bits of kit you need, So the stuff that's ready, whether it's on the bike, whether it's arm warmers, or what you're packing to eat, or what you're going to wear for your run, or, you're going to meet some people, run somewhere else, what you throw in the car. If you've been off for a month or two, you have to go and sort of look through a few boxes. What am I looking for? What do I need to find? And, you maybe turn up with the wrong stuff. You get a bit cold, you get a bit hot, whatever it may be. When you're in the groove, you've always got the kit you need. You're never too cold. You're never too hot. And just that little bit of admin side of things, running that little admin machine to keep you on your training point, kit-wise, fuel-wise, location-wise, everything else. That machine just runs itself a lot more easily when you're in the groove. And when you step off for a little bit, there's a kind of stall as you get back in. So that part of that regularity through winter is something else you don't then have to think about when you come back to races. And let's say if you are someone who does races in harsher climates, whether if you do mountain races, off-road races, you might well be finding yourself in snow in August. If you're going out to the UTMB, that's not unheard of that there's snow out there. And it's not the only one. There are plenty of races where you may encounter some pretty wintry conditions if you're going through those kind of events. So again, having that in the bag, bit of strength for you there. I think it's a brilliant way of putting it. And there's tons more we could go into with this, but I'd like to just do a very quick. Let's close out on a quick fire round, okay? Because I've got three kind of ideas here, and the first one is, when we're looking at winter training, would you go for structure or would you go for flexibility in the program?
Oh man, you're gonna catch me. I'm gonna. No matter what I answer, I'm gonna kick myself. No, I think more flexibility for sure. I mean, I am an advocate of structure because, again, it gets away from you so fast, right? I think having some level of that, but I do think that it shouldn't be as structured as race season. I think you build in, or what I do with athletes that I work with, is you build in, free time or moments for flexibility, days when you can wake up and do whatever you want to do, right? Where you're not adhering to that calendar, because there's a mental fatigue there as well, right? Where we don't want you to live and breathe the calendar year round. So I think it's some sort of hybridized version, but more flexibility, because there is a time for a lot of structure, and we do want to check those boxes, and the days matter, and when you do it, and and those things. But that comes later in the year. So now's a good time. Winter months, more flexible for sure.
Like it. So we can have a bit of flexibility in there. Now, the world is changing fast. Technology is changing fast. We could pretty much now all train for our events without ever leaving our house. And that would include all of your strength training, because you could just phone your nearest online supplier of heavy stuff and they could deliver it to your door. So no need for you to do anything other than carry it into your house. Indoor or outdoor training when we come to winter?
I think a little bit of it depends on your environment. Again, there's mental fatigue here, so I'm careful depending on the athlete. Always careful to kind of listen to where they're at from a mental perspective. Some athletes handle indoors very well. Again, they derive just as much kind of value and passion from just checking that box. Indoor session, they like the structure, and that's good for them. On the other hand, some athletes get really worn down, right? The indoor sessions, they're a means to an end. They like it, but they really like to be outside, or it's just so they can take those sessions and apply the fitness from the structure those sessions bring, apply it to outdoor rides. So I think a little bit of that depends on the athlete, but and it depends on the weather, right? Like some people you can get a fat bike, but even then, the infrastructure to ride that can be tough. So if you're in a snowy climate, but I think there is value in getting outside. I will say. I mean, I'm not. I think figuring out what that looks like for an individual is important, right? And that really goes back to our discussion about like having that conversation with yourself about what's your why, right? Like for me personally, I could stay inside forever. It wouldn't bother me. My value is in checking the box, right? So I'll do a long ride. I do a run on the tread. It doesn't matter. That's me. I'm not saying that's the best approach. That's my why, right? My kind of reason is that I enjoy moving the needle at whatever costs, right? So not saying I don't enjoy being outside, but if it rained every day and snowed and I could never do it, I'd still probably be okay. Most people aren't like that. So again, hybridized, but I think there's value in getting outside for sure. As long as it doesn't, I think with any of this, you don't want it to weigh you down too much mentally. But to your point about kind of keeping your kit tuned up, I think that's a great point. And you do get out of your rhythm, and that can you feel clumsy if you haven't gotten outside and got your gear together. You haven't, you don't have your run kit together. You don't have your bike kit. And if you take too long of a break from that process, I think that can feel kind of clunky, and that can hurt your confidence as well. So I think keeping that tuned up is good. But for most people it's cold and it is convenient to stay inside. And so I will say that, a lot of the athletes that we work with, are doing certainly the majority of their sessions indoors, and then maybe once or twice a week we get out, and then they're doing other stuff too. You have cross country skiing. If you live there's also value in taking advantage of your climate, right? So don't fight it. If everything tells you not to run and not to ride your bike because it's snowing, well, go ski, or do a Nordic day, do skate ski, go downhill ski, backcountry ski. You also don't want to resist too much. I see a lot of athletes that all signs point to no, and they're still saying yes. So in that same vein of flexibility, it's okay to switch it up, do something else. Go for a hike or a snowshoe, or now's the time to allow for that kind of fluidity in your training. And get outside and do something else too. It doesn't have to be your primary discipline.
That's great. When all the signs are saying no, and athletes are still trying to force themselves into yes, and I think if you are somewhere mountainous and there's snow, that's a great time to embrace it. But even if you're not in the mountains, this is a time to embrace strength and conditioning. This is a time to embrace your local gym. This is a time to embrace, friends who want to go hill walking, whatever it may be.
Yep.
All of these different opportunities where you may have otherwise been cycling or running or doing whatever your focused outdoor training was. Well, do use them. And again, that plays into that point you made earlier about being a complete athlete. It's not just about being an athlete for your sport. It's also about being an athlete for your life. Like, can you carry the groceries in and get them up 4 flights of stairs? Whatever it may be. Putting all of that lot together. So, no, really, really nice point. And the last one on these quick fires then, for us to close out on. Darkness is a delight at this time of year. Early or late training? I mean, they're both going to be dark, but which do you prefer?
Early. Not even for me personally, although that I do like that, for me, but the day gets in the way, right? I think just if we're talking about setting yourself up for success for every day from a performance perspective, morning, it's done, right? I mean, how many times have we all been there where you say, you push snooze, you didn't get out of bed, maybe you needed the rest, that's fine. You're like, I'll do it after work, and then work turns into this, or family, and then or you get a dinner party invite, and those are good, right? You don't want to push away family, friends, social aspects for trade. So yeah, morning for sure. I mean, and that's, so many people struggle with that, and I understand that, and it can be really hard, but you can also train yourself to do that. And most people, you don't have to be at work till maybe 8 or 9. So you're not getting up in the middle of the night, right? It's not, I think the shift is not as dramatic as it often seems once you can find that rhythm. Maybe, you get up at 6, you're on the bike or, treadmill or whatever, strength, or in the gym by 6:30. This time of year too, the workouts aren't long, right? We don't need a lot. So, I mean, an hour 15, maybe hour and a half, with a warm up and a cool down. So we're also not asking for, 4 hours, on a Tuesday or something like that. So yeah, I think morning for success, and that's a challenge, but that's the way to get it done.
I think that's very sound, and I'm interested to see that you're, with structure flexibility, indoor, outdoor. It's a sliding scale. They're not definite, and the scale slides a different way in winter. But early, late. From everyone I know, you'll see far more through it's interesting to hear it backed up, but myself, everyone else I know, it is that thing. In the morning, you can get it done. And if you don't do it in the morning, think, I'll do it later. Well, even on the weekends, that doesn't always work. Just something happens, that kind of 2-hour slot that you did have at 6 a.m., you think, well, I should still have that at 6 p.m. You don't. I don't know where it goes during the day, but it's just not there, is it?
Now, the day kind of absorbs the time. And honestly, too, from an energy perspective, if you think you're tired at 6 a.m., you're tired at 6 p.m., right? The whole day now you've had to, you're busy, or, you've got responsibilities. Certainly you've gotten things added to your plate that you woke up and you didn't have, because that's the way life goes. And, and so that's weighing down on you. So there's a mental piece, there's a physical fatigue piece. You've been up longer. There's a nutrition piece, right? I mean, the execution in the morning and refueling throughout the day, and from a recovery perspective related to fueling and nutrition, much better in the morning, right? Like, how do you time a workout in relation to like dinner time, right? Do you do, that becomes very challenging, and then you eat dinner and then you go to bed and you're hungry again, so then you don't rest as well, right? Your metabolism gets thrown off. There's a lot of value, and there's a lot of hard science behind, aerobic activity or exercise in the morning, and then the rest of your day is devoted to recovery, essentially, right? You can focus on the nutrition piece, on the rest and the evening piece. You can shift your mental capacity to other fires that need to be put out during the day.
Well, Taylor, that's a brilliant way to ram home the morning piece, but I think it's I for one, am now ready to get up tomorrow morning and ensure that my 6 a.m. happens, because just for the record, it didn't this morning. And I know 6 p.m. ain't going to happen because, like you said, life has definitely happened today. There's going to be a lot more going on between the rest of the day here. So that's me. I may not be quite ready for your 2 a.m. 6-hour run, but I'd like to think building back towards some of those, or something like it later in the year might be nice. It's kind of it's not just the smugness of the running. I always felt there's a bit of a rebel thing in that you're running back into the house having done a more than significant workout, when other people are just kind of half asleep, staggering out to go to work.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's like we were talking about. I think you can find some kind of sneaky satisfaction in knowing, and I think a little bit that draws from what's typically a competitive nature in most athletes, where you're kind of getting the, you won, right? You won the day. You won that workout, and certainly other people are doing it, but in your own mind, that's a big win, and I think that there's something to be said for that. That goes a long way, right? In that cumulative motivation, if day in and day out, trying to be your best and move the needle, if you can get it done and you feel that little uptick in how you think about yourself, how you think about the day, that's a win all around, right? It's not just physical, because missing a workout is really detrimental as well, right? Not from a fitness perspective. One day, 1 week, that doesn't make or break anything, but we all know how we feel when we had a workout planned and we miss it, and it just, you can't help but feel, even if it's not important, even if you're just going out for a quick run or a quick ride or a quick strength or whatever, if you had it and you missed it, you feel there's some negative emotions linked to that, and so it behooves everyone to try to stay away from that negativity, and build positivity. So yeah, morning, if you can swing it, hopefully you'll get up. You can get up. I'm not advocating. Hopefully the title of this podcast is not "Get Up at 2 a.m."
Get up at 2 a.m. with Taylor.
Yeah,
that's okay.
No, yeah, right. No, I won't be there most days either. But no, I mean, again, like there's that mental piece, right? I think is important. And I think there is value in kind of getting a leg up and feeling like you kind of have a jump on the competition in the early morning hours, and you're doing something that maybe some other people didn't have the motivation or couldn't find the drive to do that. And it's a big piece of the puzzle. Again, if you commit to that habit day in and day out, that builds a very vibrant and robust athlete, in the race season.
Well, that's
so
I think with all of that there, all of us are well tooled up now to take on winter and springboard into our best ever summers ahead. So I think maybe we should loop back on this around about July time and see what the winter's done for us into the summer. But Taylor, thanks so much for making the early start over on your side of the pond there to come and join us on the show today. Really good having you on. We'll put all of your details and links in the show notes for anyone who wants to connect. But just remind me, best places to get hold of you, website, social, all of those links?
ThomasEnduranceCoaching.com is where you can find me and the rest of the staff at TEC. We are on Twitter at endurance_coach, Instagram at Thomas Endurance Coaching, Facebook Thomas Endurance Coaching. Reach out. Always happy to hear from folks. And thanks for having me, Warren. I enjoyed it.
No, real fun. Just to make the point though, if anyone is thinking, yeah, I'd really like to go train with these guys, but clearly they're in America and I'm not. You do actually do most of your stuff, like, as you said, most things are done remotely, so your clients are global, right?
Yeah, every athlete that we work with is remote, so we specialize in remote-based coaching. That's personal coaching, training plans, consultations. We have athletes in dozens of different countries, coaches with specialties in all types of disciplines. So the country code is not a barrier to entry for sure. So yeah, we've gotten really good at providing really personalized and individualized service to athletes that we don't live next to or don't can't meet up for a training ride, but we do training camps as well. So there's opportunities for face-to-face time in the spring and fall. But yeah, no, for sure. ThomasEnduranceCoaching.com, and folks can check it out. And if there's any questions, an email, Taylor@ThomasEnduranceCoaching.com, and I'm happy to be a resource.
Taylor, absolutely brilliant. Thanks for being a great resource for the podcast today, and look forward to catching up with you in the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Warren.
Taylor Thomas, ladies and gentlemen, give that man a great big hand. And I hope you are all now as fired up to take on winter and win not just winter, but also summer, based on all of Taylor's brilliant input there. So look, if you want to check out Thomas Endurance Coaching in more detail or get in touch with Taylor, you'll find all of the links to find him below. And of course, when you are looking for the very best in high performance natural sports nutrition, get yourself over to 33fuel.com. You'll find all the links for us below in the show notes as well. So that's it for this show. Thanks very much for joining us, and I look forward very much to catching up with you on the next one.